Hi, Julie Jones from SSB Performance, Smarter, Stronger, Better Mindset Training. Here with this week's Mindset Made Simple Tip of the Week, brought to you by Game Day Sportswear. Shop GameDay.net for all of your game day needs. Anything. They can print anything, they can make you anything and ship it anywhere in the country. Shop GameDay.net. This week, we are talking about evaluations. This was a hard one to write. I have a lot of feelings and thoughts about evaluations, and I'm sure that you do too. We've talked over the past couple weeks about evaluation versus judgment and understanding that evaluating is so important to our growth. So important to our growth. And looking at things that went wrong, which we always do, and things that go right, adding that in there with strong emphasis, gives us a huge competitive advantage. People who evaluate, look at lessons learned, perform 23% better than those that don't. So evaluations are really, really important. And then we get end of the year evaluations. End of the year anonymous evaluations. And for a lot of you who are going through this at this point, you found out a lot of information about yourself. Lots of good stuff, I'm sure, but then there are those hurtful things that come through. As a coach, we give up so much of our time away from our families, away from taking care of ourselves, thinking about softball or whatever it is you coach 365 days a year. It's on our mind all the time, thinking about how we're going to make our teams better. And then we read at the end of the year and evaluation. I had a conversation with a colleague the other day that got her evaluation. She led her team to the NCAA tournament. They ripped through their conference tournament, and she got her evaluations, and she was crushed. I had talked to her throughout the season, and things were going well. In fact, she thought this was one of the most cohesive and best teams, great relationships. Relationships were good with her and the team, and that is not what the evaluation said. And she was crushed. Her final question to me was, do you think I need to worry about my job? Again, she just got home from the NCAA tournament. And if you look at the budgets, they don't even deserve to be there, if you look at it that way. But they keep overcoming, and obviously something is going right there. But at the end of the year, we are evaluated. We control how we evaluate everything around us. We control how we respond to what happens to us, around us, and because of us. But we do not control how others evaluate us. Of course, we influence it. But the rights and wrongs are in the eye of the beholder, of what other people think. We don't control that. Does that make it easier? Or does that make it okay? Or does that make us absolved of everything? Of course not. But we don't control it, and we need to remember that. No matter what we do, and you've heard Nick Saban say this before, no matter what we do, some people are not going to be happy. He says if you want to make everyone happy, sell ice cream. And I think, you know what? Everybody's still not going to be happy about their ice cream. There's not going to be enough cookies and cream, and melted too fast. It doesn't taste like the Baskin-Robbins kind. There's always going to be a complaint, and that's our culture. Look around. People are complaining about everything. You can't get past one scroll in your social media without someone complaining or blaming someone for something. And that is where we are today. At the end of the year, when evaluations come up, particularly when they're anonymous, the gloves seem to come off. And we have to be ready for that. It's part of what we're doing. I don't think evaluations are bad. In fact, I just said, evaluating makes us better. But I'm not so sure about anonymous evaluations, but we have to understand that we complain too, and we should expect that there are going to be complaints about us. We will never make everyone happy. In fact, it's not our job to. No matter what our job is, it's not our job to make our kids happy. It's not our job to make our spouse happy. It's not our job to make anyone happy. It's our job to do what's right, and we know that as coaches, and we just hope that our administrators know that too. So author Frank Bruni, he wrote a book called The Living Age of Grievance. He said that the questions that are asked on your evaluations, I don't know what questions your evaluations ask. I know what ours did, but I don't know what yours do. But they might be overshadowed by questions that are very prevalent in today's culture, especially when people don't get exactly what they want. And people are influenced by what other people are saying. I got a call the other day from a kid who's the starting center fielder at a school. She loves her school, and she said, "Do you think I should consider transferring 6 people in on my team or going into the portal?" Like, no. Why would you do that? Everything's going great for you. But we're influenced by the culture around us. But Bruni says these questions come up and overshadow so many other things that we think when people are asking us to evaluate. Because when we think evaluate, we think judge. Here are the questions. How have I been wronged? We do this too, not just people evaluating us. Who has wronged me? What am I owed? And how do I get back at them? Listen to the news. These questions are posed in so many politicians' words, and we're bombarded by that. And again, if we say something long enough, we start to believe it. I've heard of athletes writing down every single thing that bothers them in a notebook or in their phone. And at the end of the year, they just dump all that stuff into the evaluation, even if it was rectified. But they make notes of all the wrongs every time that they feel frustrated. Imagine as a leader, if you wrote down every single thing that every single person around you did wrong, or didn't please you, or made you feel a certain way. First of all, you'd get nothing done. And I'm pretty certain that constantly looking at what went wrong and constantly monitoring ourselves for how we feel about stuff is not leading to success. The more we spend time thinking that we are being wrong, the more we will find the wrong. But our tendency, our wiring, is to blame when things don't go our way. So those evaluating you are blaming you. We have to be very careful not to turn around and blame them right away. But we think that we spend more time as the object of blame. But trust me, we blame too. I catch myself doing it all the time. All right? But there are biological explanations to this. And I'm looking at my notes to make sure I get this all right. And they don't help our responses. So our tendency is that positive events are processed by the prefrontal cortex, which takes a little bit longer to register. And we don't give much thought to it. It's like evaluating wins and evaluating losses. We're killing ourselves to figure out why we lost. And when we win, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. The same thing goes for your athletes or whoever's evaluating you. When things go right, they're like, okay, yeah, good. And they're not going to write that down. And when things go wrong, it sticks. That emotion. And this is why our lickety-split so fast amygdala picks that stuff up immediately, and it puts us right into fight or flight. It happens so fast that we don't even realize that we're pointing fingers. Think about how many times something has gone wrong, and you sort of step back and are like, oh, not me. Put yourself in this pose. Ooh, I didn't knock that down. I didn't break the vase. How many times have you done that in your life? That is our brain's almost automatic reaction to be like, nope, even if it was us. So we have to remember that this is the posture that people are coming from. And we hope that those that are reading the evaluations understand that we are wired to blame. And we are wired to complain, not only from the culture, but we have that negativity bias. That's part of who we are. In the book, No Ego, How Can Leaders Cut the Workplace Drama, End Entitlement, and Drive Big Results, the author, his name's Cy Wakeman, says that the average employee spends 2.5 hours a day in drama, in what he calls emotional waste. He defines emotional waste as this: mentally wasteful thought processes or unproductive behavior that keeps leaders or their teams from delivering the highest results. He says it's created by our ego, and our ego loves to create drama. He says that 2+ hours of daily emotional waste and drama leads employees to drive what he calls their BMWs. They're bitching, moaning, and whining. And then they take that into their HR office, and it drives their interpretation of the environment. 2.5 hours of an 8-hour day, people are in emotional waste, bitching, moaning, and whining. We need to start with figuring out how to sort of negate that, right? According to Bruni and research, right, back to Bruni, complaining fuels our body like a drug would. It makes us feel good. Again, we're wired to do it. And that doesn't help us, but it makes us feel good. So how do we manage this? When we're unjustly blamed or we feel like we're the target of blame, what do? The first thing is that we can't go to that question of whose fault it is this. Right? We need to ask questions that help us manage it. Here are a couple that might help. What may have contributed to these statements and these feelings? What, if any, adjustments need to be made to get where we want to go? Notice I didn't say you change necessarily. You do everything different to try to make people happy. But what changes might need to be made if we want to get where we want to go? And then one question that we can ask, and this is a tough one, but it's important, is there a grain of truth in any of this that can help me grow? Not to make others happy, to make myself better. Is that possible? Obviously, it would help if we get a full understanding of what the complaints are truly about. But since they're usually anonymous, this isn't helpful. But if we can get a clearer picture of the complexity, we can avoid assumptions and then usually address them. Because when we start to assume, we know what happens. Finally, we can also use the tools that we teach our athletes, refocusing tools. Or we can go to Dr. Becky Kennedy's AVP. I thought this was a great way to look at this. We know that when people judge us, because really some of these evaluations aren't evaluations, if you look at the better way to review that I use with our teams and asking what's our end result, what was our intended result, what was our end result, what did we learn, what do we need to change? This is an evaluation. These are a lot of them are judgments based on emotion, based on disappointment, based on frustration, and we know that. And if they hurt us, we have to acknowledge that they hurt us. We have to acknowledge that we're pissed off. We have to acknowledge that we're frustrated. We have to acknowledge that we don't love the system, but we have to live in the system. We have to live in the system. We have to figure out how to get it to work for us. When we feel frustrated, worried, or disappointed, we have to acknowledge it. Like, hey, I am not sad. I feel sad. I am not hungry. I feel hungry. I'm Julie. I'm not any of these things. I feel these ways, and they are temporary. They will go. I will get past this, but I need to acknowledge them. The second, the V, the A, that's the acknowledge A. The V is validate. It sounds really kumbaya, like, oh, let's validate the way we feel. But it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Dr. Kennedy says that we should say, this makes sense. It makes sense that I'm disappointed. It makes complete sense that my colleague, who I love and took her team a long way, feels disappointed and sad. It makes sense because we put a lot of time into this. This is part of who we are, whether that's good or bad. It's what we do. It puts the food on our table. We love coaching. We love leading. And it makes sense that these things hurt us. So if we can validate the fact that this makes sense. I just talked to an athlete this morning, and she said, I'm getting really nervous deep in the count. First weekend out in front of college coaches, and I feel really tense. I said, that makes sense. It's different than playing in high school. Now different eyes are on you. You've got a reputation to live up to. It makes sense. And it's okay that you feel that way. And then the final step, the P, AVP, is permitting. When I first heard permitting, I was like, I don't know if I like permitting. But it makes sense as well. We have to realize that we are human beings. And when things mean something to us, we're going to feel a certain way about it. That doesn't mean we allow that feeling to drive our behavior. In fact, we don't. We can make other judgments. We can respond. There's a stimulus, there's a pause, and then there's a response. But we have to permit ourselves to feel that way. Dr. Kennedy uses a really great analogy. She uses a car. And frustration and worry and excitement and all the emotions we feel can be passengers in a car, but they're constantly wrangling for the steering wheel. And if they get the steering wheel, we're going off the road. We have to stay driving. We can drive around with all these emotions and all these feelings and all this stuff. We can drive around with it. We can still get to our destination. These feelings don't change our ability to coach. They don't really change our ability to think unless we allow them to drive the car. They certainly don't change our ability to perform. As I told the athlete I was meeting with this morning, no one has a hold of your bat when you're at the plate and it keeps you from swinging. Nobody, nothing, no situation changes your physical ability to swing or to see. We've got to stay driving the car. Then we can also do our own evaluation. Not judge, because that's where we want to go. We can do our own evaluations. We can use the same questions that the Navy SEALs use in their after action reviews. What was my intended result? What was my actual result? What caused or contributed to this? What do I need to do differently? What do I need to do the same? How am I going to do that? And what have I learned? These questions are void of emotion. Hard to do, but it can be helpful. The bottom line is this, is when we read these things about ourselves, when we have given, in our opinion, so much, and then this is what we get back, come on, this is our first reaction. We go into defense mode. And if we stay in defense mode, it's like that old adage that says, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. All we're doing is tearing ourselves up. We've got to be able to acknowledge, validate, and permit. We've got to be able to evaluate in a different way. We've got to ask questions that help us see without the cloud of all of this anger and frustration that could be there. And as I used to tell my teams all the time, 40% of people are with you. They're for you. They're for you. They'll fight for you. They'll go to bat for you. They'll be with you. 40% of people that are on your team or in your organization are there. They're going to do what you say. They're there, and they're going to keep moving. And then 20% of the people, you're never going to get them. It's life. The problem is, as Dr. Ziegler told me when I was at Cleveland State, you focus on the 20. You focus on that one or two kids that are just pulling it down instead of the 80%. The 40 that are with you, focusing on them and keeping them with you. The 40%, keeping them motivated. They're moving in the right direction. If we have 80% of anything, man, wouldn't you love to get 80% of your salary in your retirement? You'd be thrilled. 80% is a huge percentage. That needs to be our focus. That 20%, you're not going to get them. And if you can keep that 80% moving, then they'll move on. They'll try to take you down in the meantime, maybe, but they will move on because you've got the 80 moving in the right direction and you can win with that. I don't care what you're competing in. So if you got an evaluation that was tough to swallow, and I'm sure that there was something in almost everybody's, you get to decide how you respond to it. You may not have backing. You may have full backing. I don't know what your situation is, but regardless, you get to decide, and you can put yourself in the right mindset to be able to manage it so that you can continue to do your job in the way that you know is best. Lots of thoughts on evaluations, and I hope that maybe this helped you manage your own. Until next week, have a great week. It's time to start thinking about 2004 and 2024, 25 seasons. Reach out. Let's get together and put a program in for your team. It'll help you, your staff, and your athletes perform at their best. Have a great week.